Hello, welcome to Read by Angelique. I am Angelique, and I'm currently reading Persuasion by Jane Austen. So let's do a little recap of what we read last week. We read chapters 9 and 10. In chapter 9, there was just this relentless documentation of this just debate between whether Captain Wentworth was more interested in Louisa or Henrietta, who are Anne's sister's in-laws girls. And there was just this weight of like, Louisa's more outgoing, she's more fun, more full of life. Henrietta's beautiful, maybe more beautiful. They couldn't tell who Captain Wentworth was really into. Henrietta had been interested in a cousin, Charles Hayter, who had just come back from church and found that she was otherwise occupied by the attentions of a certain captain, and he was not happy, so he made himself scarce. And Mary, Anne's sister, was glad that Henry Hayter was getting out of the picture, but Anne, on the other hand, felt sad for him because the only disagreeable thing that Mary saw in the man was that he was not wealthy enough, which is how Anne was persuaded not to marry Captain Wentworth. And then in chapter 10, we went on a walk with Henrietta, Louisa, Charles, Mary's husband, Mary, Captain Wentworth, and Anne. Louisa and Henrietta had schemed this from the beginning, not that everyone would go together, but Louisa convinced Henrietta that she needed to go and rekindle her connection with Henry Hayter. And so off they went. They surprisingly ended up at the Hayter house. And so that got rekindled. Anne was forced to be around Captain Wentworth. She heard some unsavory things about herself through a bush. And then on the way home, she was extremely tired. They run into Captain Wentworth's sister and brother-in-law on a carriage. And everyone was like, that they offered someone to ride with them back to the house because it was still another mile for a walk. And they were like, we have room for one person if someone's tired and needs to join. Anne was extremely tired, but she's not going to speak up. Mary was tired as well and complaining, but no one else took it. So she was like, well, I'm not going to, she's got her ego. But Captain Wentworth had noticed that Anne was tired and struggling. And so he whispered in his sister's ear and was like, you know what, Anne's tired. You should really convince her to go with you. And so his sister does just that. It's like, Anne, come with us. You must be tired. And then without giving her time to decline the offer, Captain Wentworth picks her up and places her in the carriage. So are gone, but he is such a good gentleman and knows her so well that he can't just help but see her need, which I thought was an interesting interpretation on her side. But she still is not convinced that he has any leftover feelings for her. So that's where we're picking up in chapter 11. And because Henrietta is back with Henry Hayter, that only leaves Louisa for Captain Wentworth. So it's basically like a done deal, Everyone was walking in pairs. Anne all alone. Louisa with Captain Wentworth. Henrietta with Henry Hayter. Mary with her begrudging husband. Anywho. Okay. Chapter 11. The time now approached for Lady Russell's return. The day was even fixed, and Anne, being encouraged to join her as soon as she was resettled, was looking forward to an early removal to Kellynch, and beginning to think how her own comfort was likely to be affected by it. It would place her in the same village as Captain Wentworth, within half a mile of him. They would have to frequent the same church, and there must be intercourse between the two families. This was against her. But, on the other hand, he spent so much of his time at Uppercross that in removing thence she might be considered rather as leaving him behind than as going towards him. And upon the whole, she believed she must, on this interesting question, be the gainer almost as certainly as in her change of domestic society in leaving poor Mary for Lady Russell. She's trying to run away from Captain Wentworth. Okay. She wished it might be possible for her to avoid ever seeing Captain Wentworth at the Hall. Those rooms had witnessed former meetings which would be brought too painfully before her, but she was yet more anxious for the possibility of Lady Russell and Captain Wentworth never meeting anywhere. They did not like each other, and no renewal of acquaintance now could do any good. And were Lady Russell to see them together, she might think that he had too much self-possession, and she too little. These points formed her chief solicitude in anticipating her removal from Uppercross, where she felt she had been stationed quite long enough. Her usefulness to little Charles would always give some sweetness to the memory of her 2 months' visit there, but he was gaining strength apace, and she had nothing else to say for. The conclusion of her visit, however, was diversified in a way which she had not at all imagined. Captain Wentworth, after being unseen and unheard of at Uppercross for 2 whole days, appeared again among them to justify himself by a relation of what had kept him away. A letter from his friend, Captain Harville, having found him out at last, had brought intelligence of Captain Harville's being settled with his family at Lyme for the winter, of their being therefore quite unknowingly within 20 miles of each other. Captain Harville had never been in good health since a severe wound which he received 2 years before, and Captain Wentworth's anxiety to him had determined him to go immediately to Lyme. He had been there for 24 hours. His acquittal was complete, his friendship warmly honored, a lively interest excited for his friend, and his description of the fine country about Lyme so freely attended to by the party that an earnest desire to see Lyme themselves and a project for going thither was the consequence. The young people were all wild to see Lyme. Captain Wentworth talked of going there again himself. It was only 17 miles from Uppercross, though November, the weather was by no means bad, and in short, Louisa, who was the most eager of the eager, having formed the resolution to go, and besides the pleasure of doing as she liked, being now armed with the idea of merit in maintaining her own way, bore down all the wishes of her father and mother for putting it off till summer, and to Lyme they were to go, Charles, Mary, Anne, Henrietta, Louisa, and Captain Wentworth. The first heedless scheme had been to go in the morning and return at night, but to this Mr. Musgrove, for the sake of his horses, would not consent, and when it came to be rationally considered, a day in the middle of November would not leave much time for seeing a new place, after deducting 7 hours as the nature of the country required for going and returning. They were consequently to stay the night there, and not be expected back till the next day's dinner. This was felt to be a considerable amendment, and though they all met at the great house at rather an early breakfast hour, and set off very punctually, it was so much past noon before the 2 carriages, Mr. Musgrove's coach containing the 4 ladies, and Charles's curricle, in which he drove Captain Wentworth, were descending the long hill into Lyme, and entering upon the still steeper street, of the town itself, that it was very evident they would not have more than time for looking about them before the light and warmth of the day were gone. After securing accommodations and ordering a dinner at one of the inns, the next thing to be done was unquestionably to walk directly down to the sea. They were come too late in the year for any amusement or variety which Lyme as a public place might offer. The rooms were shut up, the lodgers almost gone, scarcely any family but the residents left, and as there is nothing to admire in the buildings themselves, the remarkable situation of the town, the principal street almost hurryingly into the water, The walk of the Cobb, skirting round the pleasant little bay, which in the season is animated with bathing machines and company, the Cobb itself, its old wonders and new improvements, with a very beautiful line of cliffs stretching out to the east of the town, are what the stranger's eye will seek. A very strange stranger it must be who does not see charms in the immediate environs of Lyme to make him wish to know it better. The scenes in its neighborhood, Carmouth, with its high grounds and extensive sweeps of country, and still more its sweet retired bay, backed by dark cliffs, where fragments of low rock among the sands make it the happiest spot for watching the flow of the tide, for sitting in unwearied contemplation. The wood varieties of the cheerful village of Up Lyme, and, above all, Pinny, with its green chasms between romantic rocks, where the scattered forest trees and orchards of luxuriant growth declare that many a generation must have passed away since the first partial falling of the cliff prepared the ground for such a state, where a scene so wonderful and so lovely exhibited as many more than equal any of the resembling scenes of the far-famed Isle of Wight. These places must be visited, and visited again to make the worth of Lyme understood. The party from Uppercross, passing down by the now deserted and melancholy-looking rooms, and still descending, soon found themselves on the seashore, and lingering only as all must linger and gaze on a first return to the sea. Whoever deserved to look on it at all proceeded toward the Cobb, equally their object in itself and on Captain Wentworth's account. For in a small house, near the foot of an open pier of unknown date, were the Harvilles settled. Captain Wentworth turned in to call on his friend. The others walked on, and he was to join them on the Cobb. They were by no means tired of wandering and admiring, and not even Louisa seemed to feel that they had parted with Captain Wentworth long, when they saw him coming after them with 3 companions, all well known already by description to be Captain and Miss Harville, and a Captain Benwick, who was staying with them. Captain Benwick had some time ago been first lieutenant of the Laconia, and the account which Captain Wentworth had given him on his return from Lyme before, his warm praise of him as an excellent young man and an officer whom he had always valued highly, which must have stamped him well in the esteem of every listener, had been followed by a little history of his private life, which rendered him perfectly interesting in the eyes of all the ladies. He had been encouraged to Captain Harville's sister, and oh my goodness, he was not encouraged to her. He had been engaged to Captain Harville's sister, and was now mourning her loss. They had been a year or 2 waiting for fortune and promotion. Fortune came, his prize money as lieutenant being great. Promotion, too, came at last. But Fanny Harville did not live to know it. She had died the preceding summer while he was at sea. Captain Wentworth believed it impossible for man to be more attached to woman than poor Benwick had been to Fanny Harville, or to be more deeply afflicted under the dreadful change. He considered his disposition as of the sort which must suffer heavily, untying very strong feelings with quiet, serious, and retiring manners, and a decided taste for reading, and sedentary pursuits. To finish the interest of the story, the friendship between him and the Harvilles seemed, if possible, augmented by the event which closed all their views of alliance, and Captain Benwick was now living with them entirely. Captain Harville had taken his present house for half a year, his taste and his health and his fortune all directing him to a residence unexpensive and by the sea, and the grandeur of the country and the retirement of Lyme in the winter appeared exactly adapted to Captain Benwick's state of mind. The sympathy and goodwill excited towards Captain Benwick was very great. And yet, said Anne to herself as they now moved forward to meet the party, he has not perhaps a more sorrowing heart than I have. I cannot believe his prospects to so blighted forever. He is younger than I am, younger in feeling, if not in fact, younger as a man. He will rally again and be happy with another. They all met and were introduced. Captain Harville was a tall, dark man, with a sensible, benevolent countenance, a little lame, and from strong features and want of health, looking much older than Captain Wentworth. Captain Benwick looked and was the youngest of the 3, and compared with either of them, a little man. He had a pleasing face and a melancholy air, just as he ought to have, and drew back from conversation. Captain Harville, though not equalling Captain Wentworth in manners, was a perfect gentleman, unaffected, warm, and obliging. Miss Harville, a degree less polished than her husband, seemed, however, to have the same good feelings, and nothing could be more pleasant than their desire of considering the whole party as friends of their own, because the friends of Captain Wentworth were more kindly hospitable than their entreaties for their all promising to dine with them. The dinner already ordered at the inn was at least, though unwillingly, accepted as an excuse, but they seemed almost hurt that Captain Wentworth should have brought any such party to Lyme without considering it as a thing of course that they should dine with them. There was so much attachment to Captain Wentworth in all this, in such a bewitching charm and a degree of hospitality so uncommon, so unlike the usual style of give and take invitations, and dinners of formality and display, that Anne felt her spirits not likely to be benefited by an increasing acquaintance among his brother officers. These would have been all my friends, was her thought, and she had to struggle against a great tendency to lowness. On quitting the Cobb, they all went indoors with their new friends, and found rooms so small as none but those who invite from the heart could think capable of accommodating so many. Anne had a moment's astonishment on the subject herself, but it was soon lost in the pleasanter feelings which sprang from the sight of all the ingenious contrivances and nice arrangements of Captain Harville to turn the actual space to the best possible account, to supply the differences of lodging-house furniture, and defend the windows and doors against the winter storms to be expected. The varieties in the fitting up of the rooms were the common necessaries provided by the owner, and the common indifferent plight were contrasted with some few articles of a rare species of wood, excellently worked up, and with something curious and valuable from all the distant countries Captain Harville had visited, were more than amusing to Anne. Connected as it all was with his profession, the fruit of its labors, the effect of its influence on his habits, the picture of repose and domestic happiness it presented, made it to her a something more or less than gratification. Captain Harville was no reader, but he had contrived excellent accommodations and fashioned very pretty shelves for a tolerable collection of well-bound volumes, the property of Captain Benwick. His lameness prevented him from taking much exercise, but a mind of usefulness and ingenuity seemed to furnish him with constant employment within. He drew, he varnished, he carpentered, he glued, he made toys for the children, he fashioned new netting needles and pins with improvements, and if anything else was done, sat down to his large fishing net at one corner of the room. Anne thought she left great happiness behind her when they quitted the house, and Louisa, by whom she found herself walking, burst forth into raptures of admiration and delight on the character of the navy. Their friendliness, their brotherliness, and their openness, their uprightness, protesting that she was convinced of sailors having more worth and warmth than any other set of men in England, that they only knew how to live, and they only deserved to be respected and loved. They went back to dress and dine, and so well had the scheme answered already that nothing was found amiss, though its being so entirely out of the season, and the no thoroughfare of Lyme, and the no expectation of company, had brought many apologies from the heads of the inn. Anne found herself by this time growing so much more hardened to being in Captain Wentworth's company that she had at first imagined could ever be, that the sitting down to the same table with him now, and the interchange of the common civilities attending on it, they never got beyond, was become a mere nothing. The nights were too dark for the ladies to meet again till the morrow, but Captain Harville had promised them a visit in the evening, and he came, bringing his friend also, which was more than had been expected, it having been agreed that Captain Benwick had all the appearance of being oppressed by the presence of so many strangers. He ventured among them again, however, though his spirit certainly did not seem fit for the mirth of the party in general. While Captains Wentworth and Harville led the talk on one side of the room, and by recurring to former days, supplied anecdotes in abundance to occupy and entertain the others, it fell to Anne's lot to be placed rather apart with Captain Benwick, and a very good impulse of her nature obliged her to begin an acquaintance with him. He was shy, and disposed to abstraction, but the engaging mildness of her countenance and gentleness of her manners soon had their effect, and Anne was well repaid the first trouble of exertion. He was evidently a young man of considerable taste in reading, though principally in poetry, and besides the persuasion of having given him at least an evening's indulgence in the discussion of subjects which his usual companions had probably no concern in, she had the hope of being of real use to him in some suggestions as to the duty and benefit of struggling against affliction, which had naturally grown out of their conversation. For, though shy, he did not seem reserved. It had rather the appearance of feelings glad to burst their usual restraints. And having talked of poetry, the richness of the present age, and gone through a brief comparison of opinion as to the first-rate poets, trying to ascertain whether Marmion or the Lady of the Lake were to be preferred, and how ranked the... I apologize, I'm probably butchering these titles, but... oh well. And how ranked the Gyre and the Bride of Abydos, and the moreover how the Gyre was to be pronounced. Hey, they're struggling to pronounce it too. Ha! He showed himself so intimately acquainted with all the tenderest songs of the one poet, and all the impassioned descriptions of the hopeless agony of the other. He repeated with such tremendous feeling the various lines which imaged a broken heart, or a mind destroyed by wretchedness, and looked so entirely as if he meant to be understood, that she ventured to hope he did not always read only poetry, and to say that she thought it was the misfortune of poetry to be so seldom safely enjoyed by those who enjoyed it completely, and that the strong feelings which alone could estimate it truly were the very feelings which ought to taste it but sparingly. His looks showed him not pained, but pleased with this allusion to his situation. She was emboldened to go on, and feeling in herself the right of seniority of mind, she ventured to recommend a larger allowance of prose in his daily study, and on being requested to particularize, mentioned such works of our best moralists, such collections of the finest letters, such memoirs of characters of worth and suffering, as occurred to her at the moment, as calculated to rouse and fortify the mind by the highest precepts and the strongest examples of moral and religious endurances. Captain Benwick listened attentively, and seemed grateful for the interest implied, and though with a shake of the head, and sighs which declared his little faith in the efficiency of any books, on grief like this, noted down the names of those she recommended, and promised to procure and read them. When the evening was over, Anne could not but be amused at the idea of her coming to Lyme, to preach patience and resignation to a young man whom she had never seen before, nor could she help fearing, on more serious reflection, that, like many other great moralists and preachers, she had been eloquent on a point in which her own conduct would ill bear examination. Hypocrite. She's a hypocrite. Kidding. So the light's getting low. My hair's crazy because I just got out of the shower, but this next chapter is lengthy. Well, lengthier. I think I'm going to have to wait because I think the light is really going to significantly change in that time, which I hate to do because the next chapter is so exciting. It's like the next chapter is where the tides turn. It propels the story forward. If you feel bored, even though I don't know how you could feel bored with just like the tension and in the scenes, I love it, the subtleness of it. From here on, the pace is quicker. There's more movement. It starts getting exciting. Okay. But yeah, we'll have to wait for that. Thank you for joining. Until next time.